In this reading we just listened to from the Gospel of John, we certainly heard a great deal about shepherds and sheep. But is that why all of you flocked here today? Now, I don't want to try to pull the wool over your eyes. And I'm not going to attempt to fleece you in some way. Because I know that you weren't born yesterday. But I can tell from those sheepish grins on your faces that if I ram any more puns into this message, you're going to end up thinking that it's a pretty bad sermon. Although I've heard that some of you find sheer enjoyment from this kind of humor. Others of you are tempted to run me out of here, in which case I'd have to be on the lam. If you got together a random group of 10 people and asked them, what's your favorite part of the Bible? Chances are the majority of those people would say the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. Or if you walk into just about any church, hanging in some hallway or in some Sunday school classroom, you'll find a picture of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, with Jesus holding a lamb and the flock following along behind. Or the title pastor comes from the Latin word that means shepherd. Or if you've ever seen a Roman Catholic bishop go into a sanctuary for a worship service, what does he have there in his hand? A tall pole with a curved hook on top of it called a crozier. It's meant to resemble a shepherd's crook, because a bishop is supposed to be like a shepherd for his people. Time and again in the Bible and in Christian history, we find those images of shepherds and sheep. But since most of us here don't have a farming background, since most of us here don't have much first-hand experience in dealing with sheep, what exactly are we to make of that image? What's that image supposed to mean for us? Well, for one thing, sheep like to follow a leader. It seems that thousands of years ago, one of the reasons that people first started to raise and herd sheep because they were relatively easy to keep together. As long as the sheep know who their leader is, generally speaking, they'll follow that leader wherever the leader goes. But I imagine some people are thinking to themselves, hey, don't call me a sheep. I'm an independent person. I don't just go along with the crowd. But the simple truth is that whether we like to admit it or not, just about all of us follow some leader. Just about all of us do things to fit in with some flock, to fit in with some crowd. After all, back in the 1960s and 70s, the rebels were the hippies. They were a group that basically said, we're different. We don't want to be like everyone else. And so, how did the hippies go about showing that they were different? They went off and formed their own herd and became exactly like each other by dressing alike with tie-dye t-shirts and blue jeans, by looking alike with afro haircuts, and by talking alike. Far out, peace, man. Or the rebels of today do the same basic thing. The young people of today who don't want to be like everyone else, who want to be different, what do? They go off together, form their own herd, and become exactly like each other. They all dress alike, usually in black from head to toe, and listen to the same music. But even if you're an adult and work in an office or in some other kind of setting, there's a tendency for us to want to fit in and to be like everyone else. After all, if you walk into an office or some other place of employment, you're going to find most of the people there pretty much dressed alike, pretty much talking alike, and pretty much acting alike. In other words, no matter what we do in life, usually we end up following someone's lead as we try to figure out what's right and what's normal. So the question is, who is your leader? Whose lead are you following as you try to determine what direction your life is going to take? For instance, a few years ago over in Turkey, some shepherds decided to sit down in the field one morning to have their breakfast. And as they did so, they allowed their sheep to wander around in the field where they were. But at one point, all of a sudden, the shepherds looked up from their coffee and couldn't believe what they were seeing. One particular sheep, who must have been the leader among the flock, walked over to the very edge of the field and stepped off a cliff, plunging some 45 feet to his death. And then, within a matter of seconds, hundreds of other sheep in that field followed their leader right off that cliff. So who is your leader? Because who you choose to follow certainly does matter. But here in this passage from the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And he goes on to explain why he's the good shepherd. It's because he's willing to lay down his life for the sheep. And Jesus calls on us, his sheep, to be willing to do the same. For instance, later on in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, that you are to love one another, just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Of course, to be so committed to someone, to be so dedicated to standing by someone that you'd be willing to lay down your life for them is certainly not something that comes easily or naturally for us. After all, even Jesus' own disciples weren't willing to live up to that standard, at least at first. For example, you might remember that at the Last Supper, Jesus told his disciples that one of them would betray him. But right away, Peter spoke up and said, Lord, I would never do something like that to you. Why, I would lay down my very life for you. But what happened? Later that night, after Jesus was arrested, Peter even denied knowing Jesus 3 times. But then, at the very end of the Gospel of John, after Easter, the risen Jesus appears to Peter and asks him, Peter, do you love me? And Peter answers by saying, yes, Lord, you know that I love